Please rewind this cassette.
After directing two low-budget features, a young filmmaker named Martin Scorsese set out on an adventure that would help shape and reinvent cinema for everything and everyone that followed it. On the advice of John Cassavetes, who told Scorsese after he completed Boxcar Bertha, "You've just spent a year of your life making a piece of shit," Marty set his goals on making a film based off his own life experiences growing up on the New York City streets. Scorsese and New York are like siblings, sharing a biological bond while still remaining their own individual selves. With grit and iron in his blood, Scorsese recruited the young and brilliant actors Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. Together, they took us all on a journey through some mean streets. In many ways a proto-Goodfellas, this is the film that put Scorsese on the map. With creative editing, sharp and comical dialogue, and inspired music choices, there really hadn't been anything like this movie. Not something so kinetic, so alive. I personally see a lot of Francois Truffaut in it, Cassavetes, a lot of foreign influences, but the location and sense of place gives this movie a feel of its own. We get an examination of morality, guilt, youth and revolt, and all of it done with a confident sensuality. Most of the movie takes place in rundown apartments and bars. It's a closed-in world, and we're stuck with the characters in this prison. You can feel the stakes rising in every scene, and the tension comes from seeing the lead character try to get his way out of a series of mistakes he can hardly control. The classic "my friend is a fuck-up" trope is used to absolute gold perfection in this movie. Has De Niro ever been this energetic before? I admire that they never try to make this guy likable. Johnny Boy is a crazy piece of shit, and Charlie's eventual downfall is due to his loyalty to this guy. Charlie is simply looking for a way out. Brilliantly portrayed by Harvey Keitel, Scorsese puts us in the same headspace as his lead character. We want to get out of this world too. Every turn of the story only makes us more desperate for Charlie to make the right choices. Filled with nostalgia for a more simple time, another trademark of Scorsese's career, the movie opens with a narration done by Scorsese.
You don't make up for your sins in the church. You do it in the streets. You do it at home. The rest is bullshit and you know it.
This leads us to Charlie awakening to look at himself in the mirror as we hear police sirens outside. This right away puts us into a world of despair. Following this, we get the song "Be My Baby," played over home movie footage. Scorsese starting his trend of using a camera to capture a moment in time, a memory, like looking at an old photograph. You'll also see this trend throughout his work. Remember Karen looking at the gun in Goodfellas? It's sort of like a memory you would have in your mind. Memory is never a whole being. It's always isolated images you go back to revisit the feeling you had at one time. Scorsese is obsessed with this, often telling his stories in a docudrama fashion. At points it feels like he cares more about getting things right over the creation of good fiction. The magic is in the details. While The Godfather made the mob operatic and almost admirable, a look at immigrants and capitalism in a world without heroes, everyone's corrupt, Scorsese shows you the real world of crime. It's not flashy or beautiful. It's ugly, it's dangerous, and you don't want to be part of it. So how do you find light in the darkness? Scorsese said the movie is a story of a modern saint, a saint in his own society, but a society happens to be gangsters. How can Charlie be a good man when he's a product of his environment?
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
One of Scorsese's greatest strengths as a filmmaker is that he's willing to take moral stands. He doesn't want you to idolize or fantasize about his characters. You're supposed to be turned off by it, and to feel bad that you ever thought this kind of life could be fulfilling. There's nothing to like about a place this cruel and people this terrible. This willingness to separate the shit from the gold is the key to his career. As cinematic as his work can be, he doesn't want to lie to you. He's our saint, trying to show us the right path by taking us on a journey through hell. And be sure, this is hell. The red lighting isn't there for no reason. The movie asked us, can God forgive us? Should everyone be allowed the right to forgiveness? Charlie's internal struggle is so compelling because his real fear is going to hell, giving this film bigger stakes than what's going on around him. He might get out of a tough spot in his life, but what happens after that? This is the stuff of great tragedy. As much as we might like and relate to Charlie, he's fucked. And deep down, I think Scorsese feels the same. This conflict with self is why the movie is so personal, and why it's so damn entertaining. There's no Goodfellas without Mean Streets. There's no Casino without this movie. There's no Sopranos without this movie. And while Scorsese may have topped himself with other movies that were masterpieces like Taxi Driver or Raging Bull, it's fascinating to go back and look at the foundation of his entire career. This is passionate, introspective filmmaking at its best, dynamic and acidic, like a cut that won't stop bleeding. The film's title comes from an essay written by the great Raymond Chandler. Chandler wrote, "Down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. He is the hero. He is everything. He must be a complete man and a common man, and yet an unusual man. He must be, to use a rather weathered phrase, a man of honor, by instinct, by inevitability, without thought of it, and certainly without saying it. He must be the best man in his world, and a good enough man for any world. He will take no man's money dishonestly and no man's insolence without a due and dispassionate revenge. He is a lonely man, and his pride that is you will treat him as a proud man or be very sorry you ever saw him. The story is this man's adventure in search of a hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it did not happen to a man fit for adventure. If there were enough like him, the world would be a very safe place to live in, without becoming too dull to be worth living in." This is one of the defining films of the new Hollywood movement. Mean Streets demonstrates the power of independent cinema. In a world that Scorsese creates, anything can happen, and most of what happens is going to be bad. It's a snapshot in time, a needle to the arm, a death of innocence. Why was the 70s so good? That's what this series has all been about. Because of films like this. The style of this movie comes from the passion of making it. And that's why it's so special. And that's why the filmmakers of this time stand out above all the giants in the history of cinema. They really cared about what they were doing. And because of that, when we watch these movies, we care too.
That quote was from our great Martin Scorsese. So,